The envelope came back 3 days after I mailed it. Same cream cardstock. Same gold calligraphy. Same RSVP card I'd spent 40 minutes choosing because I wanted the weight of it to feel like an invitation, not a plea. But someone had opened it, removed the invitation, and put something else inside. A torn piece of notebook paper. My mother's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to sign my permission slips and write proud of you on lunch napkins in 3rd grade. 6 words. Don't bother. We won't come. I am a structural engineer. I calculate how much weight a thing can hold before it fails. I know the exact point where load exceeds capacity and something that looked perfectly solid just gives. I stood in my apartment in Los Angeles holding that envelope, and the math was happening inside my chest. Lateral force versus tensile strength. The numbers weren't good. My other hand went to my bag. Fingers found the steel T-square I keep in the side pocket, a 6-inch drafting square. I bought myself the day I graduated from UCLA because nobody else was going to buy me anything. I rubbed my thumb along the edge the way some people touch a cross or a ring. Cold metal. Exact angles. Something that doesn't change its mind about you. Here's what you need to know about the Langston family of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. There are 2 daughters, and one of them is the right one. Shelby is the right one. Shelby stayed. Shelby married Cole Prentice at 21 in the First Baptist Fellowship Hall with 200 guests and a tiered cake our mother spent 3 weeks planning. Shelby lives 10 minutes from the ranch. Shelby has 2 kids, Levi, 4, and Brinley, 2, and our mother babysits every Thursday so Shelby can get her nails done. Shelby is blonde and small and laughs like wind chimes and has never once been told she is a disgrace to this family. I am the other one. The first time I understood the math, I was 11. The whole family was going to Disney World, a trip our parents had been saving for all year. The night before we left, my mother came into my room while I was packing my suitcase. She sat on the edge of my bed and put her hand on my knee the way you do when you're about to say something kind. We only have 4 tickets, sweetheart. And Shelby really, really wants to go. 4 people, 4 tickets. Dad, Mom, Shelby, and the space where I used to be. I stayed with my grandmother. Nana June made me chicken and dumplings and let me watch whatever I wanted on TV and told me to smile for a Polaroid on the front porch. I smiled. My mouth did anyway. Somewhere in Shelby's bedroom, there's still a photo album from that trip, matching Mickey ears. Castle at sunset. Shelby on my father's shoulders. There is no album from my week with Nana June. Just the Polaroid she took of me on the porch. A girl in a Sonic the Hedgehog t-shirt, grinning with teeth that were too big for her face and eyes that had already done the math. 4 tickets, 3 Langstons, and me on the porch. After Disney, the pattern got easier to see, or maybe I just got better at reading blueprints. Shelby's dance recital. Front row, both parents, flowers afterward. My science fair win, 1st place, regional qualifier. A text from my mother that said, "That's great, Han." No period, no exclamation point. Just 5 words thumbed out between whatever she was actually doing. Shelby's first car at 17. A used Civic, red bow on the hood, Dad beaming. My scholarship to UCLA, full ride, engineering program. My mother at the kitchen table, reading the letter with her lips pressed into a line I now recognize as fear, saying, "That piece of paper won't keep you warm at night, Harper." And yet I kept building. Kept handing them blueprints of myself and waiting for someone to say, "This is a good design. Let's build this." When I was 16, I worked the drive-thru at Dairy Queen for 4 months. Saved $220. Bought my mother 2 tickets to see Reba McEntire at the BOK Center in Tulsa, her favorite singer, the one she hummed while making biscuits. I wrapped the tickets in tissue paper and watched her open them on Mother's Day morning. She took Shelby. "You understand, honey. You're the responsible one." Responsible, the word they give you instead of chosen. I learned it like a middle name. Harper Responsible Langston. The daughter who would understand, who would stay quiet, who would keep offering and keep being passed over and keep understanding because that was her structural role in this family, to bear the load so everyone else could stand comfortably on top of her. I left Bartlesville the day after high school graduation, packed 2 suitcases. My father stood at the front door. No hug. Arms at his sides like fence posts. "Don't come back asking for money," he said. I didn't. Not once in 10 years. So when I addressed that cream envelope to Mr. and Mrs. Earl Langston, Rural Route 4, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, when I chose the gold calligraphy and the heavy cardstock and the little RSVP card with the pre-stamped return, I knew. Structurally speaking, I knew the probability of failure. I am an engineer. I run the numbers before I build. And the numbers said, "This bridge has never held a single pound of weight. There is no reason to believe it will hold now." But I mailed it anyway, because the 11-year-old in me, the one on the porch in the Sonic t-shirt, still believed in one more load test. The bridge failed. And then my phone buzzed. Shelby. A photo. My invitation, shredded into confetti on the kitchen table. Gold calligraphy in pieces. The red checkered tablecloth I remember from every meal of my childhood, visible underneath the wreckage. My mother's coffee mug in the frame, half full. She'd done this during her morning coffee. Routine. Shelby's text. "Mom says don't embarrass yourself. Be too nice paper lol? Lol." My sister typed LOL under a photograph of my wedding invitation in pieces. I checked my call log. 1 missed call from my father 40 minutes earlier. I called back. 4 rings. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What do you say to the man who stood at the door like a fence post and watched you leave? The apartment was quiet. Los Angeles hummed 10 stories below traffic. Sirens, someone's bass-heavy music pulsing through the warm air. I set the envelope on the counter next to the T-square. 2 objects that tell the same story. One I made for them and one I made for myself. Only one of them still held its shape. I should have cried. I think a normal person would have cried. Instead, I did what I always do when something breaks. I pulled out a pencil and started calculating what it would take to build something new. I arrived in Los Angeles with $800 in a checking account and a suitcase that smelled like Oklahoma hay and motor oil and the particular brand of dryer sheets my mother bought in bulk from Walmart. I remember standing outside the UCLA dormitory at 7 in the morning, the August heat already pressing down like a hand, and thinking, this is the farthest anyone in my family has ever been from Bartlesville. It wasn't far enough. Engineering school is 85% men. Nobody tells you that before you show up. Nobody tells you that the first week, a guy in your statics class will look at your calculations and say, "Who helped you with this?" And when you say nobody, he'll laugh like you told a joke. Nobody tells you that the study groups will form without you, that the lab partners will pair off while you're still looking around, that you will spend 4 years being quietly, politely invisible in a room full of people who are louder than you and less precise. I was not loud. I was precise. There is a particular kind of comfort in numbers. A beam either holds or it doesn't. A foundation either distributes the load evenly or it cracks. There's no ambiguity. No, you understand, honey. No favoritism. Steel doesn't care if you're the right daughter or the wrong one. It cares about yield strength and cross-sectional area and whether you did the math correctly. I always did the math correctly. Graduated 2019. Summa cum laude. No one came. I rented a gown, walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and took a selfie in the parking lot with my cap tilted because I couldn't get it to sit straight. Then I went to Target, bought a 6-inch steel T-square, the good kind, the kind that costs $40 and lasts a lifetime, and I held it in the Target bag on the bus ride home and thought, this is my diploma. The real one, the one I bought myself. Mercer and Associates hired me that fall. Mid-sized structural engineering firm, office in Culver City, clients ranging from residential retrofits to commercial high-rises. I started as a junior engineer running calculations that someone else checked. By year 2, I was checking other people's calculations. By year 3, I was leading seismic retrofit projects, evaluating whether buildings could survive the next big earthquake. And when the answer was no, designing the reinforcement that would make them hold. I was good at making things hold, professionally at least. I called home on holidays: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Mother's Day, my father's birthday. Lorraine answered when she felt like it. She'd talk about Shelby's pregnancy, Shelby's new kitchen, Shelby's kids. The funny thing Levi said at church, I'd listen. Sometimes I'd try to tell her about a project we were reinforcing, a 1920s theater in Silver Lake. Beautiful old bones, and I was proud of the solution we'd found for the unreinforced masonry. That's nice, honey, she'd say. The same way you say that's nice to a child, showing you a crayon drawing. Then, oh, Shelby's calling on the other line. Talk soon. My father and I did not talk. We had not really talked since the day he stood at the door and told me not to come back asking for money. Occasionally he'd pick up when I called, and we'd exchange weather reports like two strangers waiting for the same bus. Hot out there? Yep. Hot here too. Then Lorraine would take the phone, and the Shelby report would begin. 3 years of this. Building in Los Angeles. Falling into a void in Oklahoma. Structurally speaking, I was cantilevered, extended out over nothing, held up only by my own rigidity. Then I met James. October 2022. A documentary crew came to shoot at a construction site in Koreatown, where we were doing a seismic evaluation on a mixed-use building. I was on the 3rd floor checking rebar spacing when a man with a camera on his shoulder asked me to explain what I was doing in a way that his editor would understand. I make sure buildings don't fall down, I said. That's the shortest interview I've ever done, he said. He was smiling. He had the kind of face that looked like it was always about to smile, mouth ready, eyes already there. His name was James Park. He was a cinematographer, freelance, Korean-American, raised in Torrance. He was 30. He was warm in a way that I didn't fully understand, because warmth in my experience was always conditional, always the thing that came before someone told you they only had 4 tickets. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked me what I loved about engineering. I said, the certainty. He asked what I meant. I said, a weld is either strong enough or it isn't. Nobody gets to decide afterward that it was supposed to be a different weld. He looked at me for a long time after that. Not the way men usually looked at me. Not sizing up. Not calculating. Just looking. Like he was reading a blueprint and finding it interesting. First date. A faux restaurant in Little Saigon. Small, loud, plastic chairs. I told him about the Disney trip. I don't know why I told him I hadn't told anyone in LA. Not my roommates in college, not my coworkers, nobody. But James asked about my family, and instead of the usual, they're fine, they're in Oklahoma, I opened my mouth, and the Disney trip came out like a splinter that had been working its way to the surface for 17 years. He didn't say that's terrible. He didn't say I'm sorry. He was quiet for a moment, chopsticks still, broth cooling. Then he said, so you never got the photo album? 5 words. And I knew he understood. Not the anger, anyone can understand anger. He understood the specific shape of the absence. The empty page where the photos should have been. 6 months into dating, I met his mother, Eunice Park, 62. Retired dry cleaner, small woman, sharp eyes, hands that looked like they'd pressed 10,000 shirts and still had the grip strength to prove it. She served me jiggy and watched me eat, and asked questions that had edges wrapped in politeness. Where is your family, Harper? Why don't they visit? I said they were busy with the ranch. Mrs. Park nodded in a way that meant she didn't believe me but wasn't going to push not yet. She taught me to roll kimbap. She corrected my rice to vinegar ratio 3 times without apology. And at the end of that first dinner, she handed me a container of leftover banchan and said, come back Thursday. Not a question. An instruction. I came back Thursday. And the Thursday after that, I called home on Thanksgiving. Lorraine picked up on the 4th ring. Harper! Oh, good. Shelby's pregnant again. Can you believe it? Third one. When are you settling down? I was settling. She just wasn't paying attention. James proposed in October 2025 on the rooftop of a building I'd retrofitted 2 years earlier, a 5-story apartment complex in Echo Park, where the owner had cried when I told her the building would survive the next 7-point quake. James got down on one knee next to a seismic joint I'd designed, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. Then I did the thing I promised myself I wouldn't do. I sent the invitation. Cream cardstock, gold calligraphy. I addressed it carefully, each letter as precise as a construction drawing, because somewhere beneath the load calculations and the T-square and the 10 years of building a life nobody in Bartlesville cared about, there was still an 11-year-old girl on a porch in a Sonic t-shirt who believed that if she just asked one more time, they would come. Nina, senior engineer at Mercer, my closest friend at work, Nigerian-American, the kind of woman who says exactly what she means and means exactly what she says. Nina watched me seal the envelope and said, "Are you sure?" "They're my parents," I said. As if that answered anything. As if blood had ever been load-bearing. Have you ever built something beautiful in a city where no one from home would ever see it? The invitation was mailed on a Monday. By Thursday, it came back. I need to go back to the envelope for a moment. Because there are details I skip, details that matter structurally, even if they're small. The cardstock was Crane & Co. 100% cotton. I know this because I spent 2 hours in a stationery shop in Pasadena, comparing weights and textures, running my thumb across sample after sample, because I am a person who believes that materials matter. I wanted my parents to hold the invitation and feel its quality before they read a word. I wanted them to think, "She's doing well out there." The calligraphy was done by a woman named Gina who works out of a studio in Atwater Village. She charged $11 per envelope. This is because I wanted the letters to look like they'd been written by hand, by someone who cared. Mr. and Mrs. Earl Langston, Rural Route 4, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, 74003. Each letter placed with intention. My mother's handwriting on the notebook paper was the opposite. Fast, angry. The W in won't press so hard it tore the page slightly, but she'd still capitalized the first letter of the sentence, still used a period at the end. Lorraine Langston. The kind of woman who corrects your grammar while dismantling your hope. I want you to understand the timeline. I mailed the invitation Monday morning. By Tuesday evening, it had arrived. I'd paid for priority. By Wednesday morning, my mother had opened it, read it, torn it apart, and gone about her day. By Thursday afternoon, the torn notebook paper was back in my mailbox in Los Angeles. She'd paid for priority too. She wanted me to know quickly. Efficiency. My mother and I have that in common. The first call I made was to my father. Earl Langston is not a man who speaks. He is a man who occupies space silently, like a load-bearing wall present, essential in theory, but producing nothing. In 28 years, I have heard my father yell exactly once at a coyote that got into the chicken run. Every other conflict in our house was handled by my mother, while my father stood in the background, hands in his pockets, looking at a spot 6 inches above everyone's head. He picked up on the third ring. I could hear the ranch behind him wind, a gate creaking, the low complaint of cattle. "Dad, did you see the invitation?" A breath. Long, the kind that carries the weight of something a man has decided not to say. "Your mother, she's upset. You know how she gets. Did you want to come?" Silence. Not the charged, intentional silence of someone withholding power. The slack, empty silence of someone who stopped making his own decisions so long ago he's forgotten the mechanism. I counted 3 seconds. 4, 5, the way I count seconds in a load test when you're waiting to see if the structure holds or gives. It's complicated, Harper. The word complicated is a door that men like my father use to exit conversations they can't handle. It means, I will not disagree with your mother. I will not stand between you. I will not drive to the airport and fly to California and walk you down the aisle because that would require me to choose. And I have spent 31 years in this marriage by never choosing. Okay, Dad. Click. The second call was to my mother. Lorraine answered on the first ring. Her voice was controlled the particular frequency she uses when she has already rehearsed what she's going to say. Church committee voice. This is my position and I have scripture to back it up voice. Oh, you're calling about that little card? That little card. $11 per envelope. 2 hours in a stationery shop. A lifetime of hoping condensed into cream cardstock and gold ink. That little card? Mom, I'm getting married. I want you to be there. Honey. She stretched the word like taffy, sweet and suffocating. I am not flying across the country for some wedding I wasn't consulted about. You made your choices. You chose that life. You chose that city. And you chose that boy. She paused on the word. Let it land. Don't expect us to pretend that's normal. That boy, James. 31 years old, college educated, kind to waiters and children and stray cats, calls his mother every Sunday, can light up a room by walking into it. That boy, because his last name is Park and not Parker. Because his grandmother came from Seoul and not Stuttgart. His name is James. Mom, I know what his name is. That is not the point. What is the point? The point is you left, Harper. You left this family. And now you want to throw some big fancy party in California with strangers and pretend that's a wedding? A real wedding is what Shelby had. Family, church, people who know you. Not some production. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. There was so much to say that the words jammed in the doorway like people trying to exit a building during a fire, too many, too fast, blocking each other. So nothing came out. I have to go, Lorraine said. Bible study at 6. I'll pray for you. She hung up. She would pray for me. In the same church where she organized the potluck and the bake sale and the Christmas pageant. She would bow her head and ask God to fix her daughter. The one who moved to California and fell in love with the wrong kind of man. The one who sent fancy invitations to people who didn't ask for them. She would pray, and the women around her would pat her hand and say, "Bless your heart, Lorraine," and nobody, not one of them, would ask what Harper's side of the story might be. The third call came to me. Shelby, 9:30 that night. I almost didn't pick up. My thumb hovered over the green button for 4 rings, which is 3 rings longer than a decision should take. Hey. Her voice was pitched in that register she uses when she wants to sound concerned, but is actually delivering a verdict. Look, I don't want you to be, surprised that Mom and Dad aren't coming. Because honestly, Harper, you didn't really expect them to, right? I said nothing. You left. You left and you built this hole, whatever you have out there, and good for you, I guess. But you don't get to leave and then demand a standing ovation. That's not how family works. Family shows up. Every day. I show up, I'm here. Harper. I'm the one who takes Levi to the dentist and helps Mom with the garden and sits through Dad's stories about cattle prices for the 900th time. I'm here. And you're where? Some apartment in LA with a boyfriend Mom's never met, planning a wedding nobody asked for? She paused, waiting for me to argue. I didn't. Not because I had nothing to say. The words were there, stacked behind my teeth like rebar waiting to be placed. But I was running the calculations, and the number said, this structure was never designed to hold this kind of load. Any force I apply will be wasted. I just think you need to be realistic, Shelby said, about who you are to this family. I knew exactly who I was to this family. I'd known since I was 11, standing on a porch in a Sonic t-shirt, watching the car pull away. Good night, Shelby. I sat on the floor. Not dramatically, just the way you sit when your legs decide they're done holding you, and the floor is right there. My phone was still bright in my hand, Shelby's name at the top. Call duration. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. On the kitchen counter, the torn notebook paper and the cream envelope. Across the room, my laptop opened to the seismic report I'd been working on before any of this started. The screen had gone to sleep. Everything in the apartment was still. The refrigerator hummed. Traffic moved outside like something that would never stop, no matter what happened inside this room. James came home at 10. He found me on the floor. Didn't ask what happened. He could see the envelope on the counter, could read the geometry of my body the way I read the geometry of a building under stress. He sat down next to me, put his back against the cabinets, took my phone, turned off the screen, placed it face down on the tile between us. We sat there, two people on a kitchen floor in Los Angeles, 800 miles from a ranch where my invitation was confetti and my name was a problem to be prayed about. After a while, I said, "Structurally speaking, I just ran out of reinforcement." James put his hand on mine. Didn't squeeze. Just placed it there, the way you place a temporary support under a beam that's starting to bow. And we stayed like that until the refrigerator cycled off and the apartment went truly quiet, and I could hear, for the first time, the sound of something inside me beginning to give. The next morning, I told James I wanted to cancel the wedding. He was making coffee. French press, he's particular about it. Heats the water to exactly 200 degrees, times the steep at 4 minutes, pours through a metal filter because he says paper filters absorb the oils. I love watching him make coffee. I love the precision of it, the way a man who is messy about everything else becomes meticulous about this one small thing. He was standing at the counter with a thermometer in the kettle when I said it. "I think we should cancel." The thermometer stayed in the water. His hand didn't move. But something behind his eyes recalculated the way a camera adjusts when the light changes. "Okay," he said. "Not agreement. Acknowledgement. The word you say when someone hands you information you need time to hold. Can you tell me why?" I couldn't, actually. Not in a way that made sense. Not in the clean, mathematical way I explain everything else. What I wanted to say was, how can I stand at an altar and promise someone forever when the people who were supposed to love me first didn't even want to sit in a folding chair and watch? But what came out was closer to, I can't. It just doesn't make sense to build something on top of. I stopped. I was reaching for the word, and it wasn't there. The metaphor I always use, the construction language, the load-bearing terminology, the framework that I've wrapped around my entire internal life like rebar inside concrete, it was gone. I opened my mouth and there was no blueprint, no calculation, no structurally speaking. Just a woman in a kitchen who couldn't finish a sentence. That was the part that scared me. Not the crying that came later, not the canceled meetings or the unanswered texts. The moment I lost my language, because my language is how I hold myself together. It's the structure inside the structure, and when it went silent, I understood for the first time that I was not in a controlled demolition. I was in a collapse. The next 2 weeks are hard to describe because I wasn't fully present for them. I went to work, I came home, I ate when James put food in front of me and didn't eat when he didn't. I stopped calling Oklahoma not as a statement. Just because the part of me that dials numbers and forms sentences and hopes for different outcomes had gone somewhere I couldn't reach. Nina covered 2 of my projects without being asked. James moved quietly through the apartment, like a man walking through a room where someone is sleeping, careful not to disturb whatever fragile rest I was getting. I should tell you about the Wednesday. It was 9 days after the envelope. I was at my desk at Mercer running a lateral load calculation for a parking structure in Glendale routine work, the kind I can normally do while thinking about something else entirely. Plug in the variables: wind speed, seismic zone, soil classification, dead load, live load. Run the model, check the output, confirm, initial, move on. I got the soil classification wrong. Not a small error. I used type D instead of type E, which changes the seismic design category, which changes the base shear coefficient, which means every calculation downstream was built on the wrong foundation. In structural engineering, this is the kind of mistake that gets people killed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but years later, when the earthquake comes and the parking structure doesn't hold, because someone entered the wrong letter into a spreadsheet on a Wednesday in November. Nina caught it. Of course Nina caught it. Nina catches everything, which is why she's senior, and I am not, and I have never once resented her for it. She pulled me into the conference room with the door that doesn't fully close and the whiteboard nobody's erased since August. Type E, Harper. Glendale is Type E. You know this. I know. You've never gotten soil classification wrong. Not once in 3 years. I know. She sat on the edge of the table, crossed her arms, looked at me the way she looks at a structural drawing that doesn't add up, not angry, just calculating where the error originated. Tell me. So I told her. The envelope. The 6 words. The 3 phone calls. The confetti on the red checkered tablecloth. James's hand on mine on the kitchen floor. The wedding I wanted to cancel. The language I couldn't find. All of it in the conference room with the unclosed door and the August whiteboard, while somewhere in Glendale a parking structure waited for the right soil classification. Nina was quiet for a while. Then she said something I didn't expect. My parents didn't come to my naturalization ceremony. I looked up, 2014, federal courthouse in downtown LA. I'd waited 6 years for that appointment. My mother, she's in Lagos, she said. That's American nonsense, Shinonyerim. You are Igbo. A piece of paper does not change your blood. Nina uncrossed her arms. I cried for a week. I almost didn't go. And then I went anyway. And the judge who swore me in an older black woman, Judge Harriet Colvin, I will remember her name until I die. She shook my hand afterward and said, "Welcome home." Beat. Sometimes home is where you're welcome, Harper, not where you're from. I sat with that. It didn't fix anything. A sentence doesn't fix a structural failure. You need actual reinforcement, actual labor, actual time. But it was the first thing in 9 days that landed somewhere solid inside me. A footing, not a foundation, just a footing. That night, I couldn't sleep. James was breathing slow and steady beside me. He sleeps like a man with no unfinished calculations, which I have always envied. I got up, went to the living room, opened my bag. The T-square was in the side pocket where it always is. 6 inches of steel. $40 at Target. The only graduation gift I've ever received, given to me by myself, for myself, in a parking lot in Westwood while wearing a cap I couldn't get straight. I held it, turned it over, ran my thumb along the edge, and I thought about the day I bought it, how proud I was, and how sad, and how those 2 things existed in the exact same breath, the way load and resistance exist in the same beam. I thought about every time I touched this thing when the numbers got hard, or the day got long, or the missing pieces of my life pressed in from the edges. My little steel compass, my proof that I could build things, even if nobody watched me build them. And then I thought about the invitation, the calligraphy, the 40 minutes choosing cardstock, the $11 per envelope, the priority postage, all that care, all that precision, all that engineering aimed at 2 people who shredded it between sips of morning coffee. Something moved through my arm, not a decision, just a current, like a circuit completing, and I threw the T-square at the wall. It hit the drywall with a sound I will never forget. Not a crash, a puncture, a short, dense thock, and then it stuck there, one arm embedded in the wall, the other pointing at the ceiling like a crooked hand. Drywall dust floated down. James was in the doorway. I don't know how fast he moved, but he was there. And I was on the floor again, not sitting this time, but folded. Knees to chest, arms around my shins, and the sound that came out of me was not something I'd planned or allowed or could have stopped. It was not elegant. It was not cinematic. It was the sound a structure makes when the last reinforcement gives, and there is nothing left between it and the ground. I cried until my ribs hurt, until my eyes swelled, until my throat closed to a pinhole and every breath was a negotiation. James sat next to me on the floor, same position as before, back against the cabinets, and he didn't say it was okay. He didn't say it would get better. He said, "I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter. It matters. They're your parents and they broke something." Then, after a while, but I need you to hear this. Whether we get married on a cliff or in a courthouse or not at all, I'm here. I'm not leaving because they left. I heard him. I heard the words, and I knew they were true, the way I know a weld is true by testing it. 3 years of James Park, and he had never once failed a load test. Not once. But hearing something and believing it are two different materials. One is soft. The other takes time to cure. If you were standing in that apartment, holding that phone, would you have called them, or would you have thrown it against the wall? I didn't call them. I didn't throw the phone. I just sat there, and for the first time in 28 years, I stopped calculating. 3 days after I threw the T-square into the wall, someone knocked on my door at 11 in the morning on a Saturday. I wasn't expecting anyone. I was on the couch in James's UCLA sweatshirt, which I'd been wearing for 2 days because it smelled like him and required no decisions. James was at a shoot in Long Beach, a commercial for a kitchen appliance company. The kind of job that pays well and bores him completely. He'd kissed my forehead before he left and said, "I'll be home by 5. He didn't say, "Will you be okay?" because he'd learned in 2 weeks that the question itself is a kind of weight, and I was already carrying too much. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps. The knock of a person who is not asking permission. I opened the door. Mrs. Eunice Park stood in the hallway, holding a large ceramic pot with both hands, a cloth bag of banchan containers hanging from her elbow, and an expression that made it clear she had not come to ask how I was feeling. "Have you eaten today?" "I know." "Not yet." She walked past me into the kitchen. Didn't wait for an invitation. Didn't comment on the sweatshirt or the unwashed dishes or the dent in the drywall, where a T-square had recently been removed by a man who knew better than to ask about it. She set the pot on the stove, turned the burner to medium, and began laying out banchan kimchi, pickled radish, seasoned spinach, tiny dried anchovies with the efficiency of a woman who has fed people through every kind of crisis and does not require a conversation to begin doing so. I stood in my own kitchen and watched my fiancé's mother arrange small dishes on my counter, and something inside my chest shifted not dramatically, not like a wall giving way, but like a door opening an inch. Just enough to let in a line of light. "Sit," Mrs. Park said. I sat. She served the jjigae in a bowl she'd brought from home, ceramic, blue and white, the kind you see in Korean restaurants. She placed it in front of me with a spoon and 2 napkins, and a look that said, "Eat more clearly than the word itself." I ate. The broth was hot and red, and it burned my tongue slightly, and that small pain was the first thing I'd felt in 3 days that wasn't grief. It tasted like someone's kitchen, like someone's care. Like Tuesday nights at the Park House in Torrance, when Mrs. Park would refuse to let me leave without a container of something. She sat across from me and didn't speak until I'd finished half the bowl. Then she said, "James told me." "Not all of it." "Enough." I put the spoon down. "When I came to America," she said, "I was 25. Incheon to LAX, 1 suitcase, a husband who worked at his uncle's auto shop, and $300 in an envelope my mother gave me at the airport." She paused, adjusted a banchan dish a 1/4 inch to the left, for no reason other than precision. "My parents, they did not want me to go. My father said nothing. My mother said everything. She said I was throwing away my family. She said I was selfish. She said, 'You are dead to us.'" I stopped breathing for a moment. Not metaphorically. I didn't see my mother for 14 years. 14 years, Harper. Do you know how long that is? When I left, my hair was black. When I saw her again, it was gray, and she was smaller. Mothers are not supposed to get smaller. Mrs. Park looked at her hands, the hands that had pressed 10,000 shirts, that had signed a lease on a dry cleaning shop, that had raised 2 boys in a country that was not the one she was born in. When she finally came to visit, she walked through my house and she looked at the photos on the wall: James in his soccer uniform, David at his piano recital, the shop on opening day, and she started to cry. And she said, "You survived without me." Mrs. Park looked at me, and I said, "I didn't survive without you, Uma." I survived because of the people who showed up when you didn't. The kitchen was quiet. The jjigae bubbled on the stove, low and steady, the only sound in the room. Then Mrs. Park reached across the table and put her hand over mine, the same hand James had held on this same kitchen floor 10 days ago, and she said, "Family is not blood, Harper. Family is who sets the table when you can't feed yourself." I looked down at the bowl she'd brought from her own kitchen, at the banchan she'd driven 45 minutes from Torrance to lay out on my counter, at the table she had set for me because I couldn't set it for myself. The math was simple. Even without my language, I could do this math. After lunch, Mrs. Park pulled something from the cloth bag. A photo album. Thick burgundy cover. Slightly bent at the corners from years of handling. "I want to show you something." She opened it. Page after page of the Park family James. At 5 in a tiny tuxedo at a wedding. David building a sandcastle at Manhattan Beach. Miss Park behind the counter of the dry cleaning shop with a customer's coat slung over his arm. Mrs. Park at James's college graduation, holding a bouquet of flowers that was almost bigger than she was. A lifetime. A record. The opposite of the album I never got from Disney. Then she turned to a page near the back. Recent photos. And there I was. The 4th of July barbecue at the Park House last summer. I was standing by the grill next to James's uncle, holding a corn on the cob, laughing at something with my head tilted back and my mouth wide open. I didn't know anyone was taking pictures. I didn't know I was being recorded. But there I was, in someone's family album, between James's cousin's graduation and David's engagement dinner. I had been in a family this whole time. I just hadn't recognized it, because it didn't look like the one I'd been trying to get back into. Mrs. Park closed the album. "You belong in this book, Harper. You have for a long time." She left at 3. Hugged me at the door, a short, firm hug. The kind that says enough now, "You'll be fine," and told me to return the pot next Thursday. Not a suggestion. A schedule. That night, I stood on the balcony. Los Angeles spread below 10 million lives, humming an orange streetlight. James came up behind me, leaned on the railing. We were quiet for a while, the way we're quiet when neither of us needs to fill the space. "You're up late," he said. I keep checking my phone. "For what?" The question sat between us. He knew the answer. I knew he knew. I was checking for a call from Bartlesville, a voicemail from my father, a text from my mother that said we changed our minds. I was still waiting for 4 tickets to Disney World, 27 years later, on a balcony in Los Angeles, 800 miles from a porch where a girl in a Sonic t-shirt never stopped hoping. I picked up the phone, looked at the screen, no missed calls, no messages, no Langstons, just the time 11:47 p.m. and a wallpaper photo of James and me at the Getty, squinting into the sun. I turned the phone face down on the railing, left it there. I'm done building bridges to people who aren't standing on the other side. James looked at me. "Does that mean?" "We're getting married. I don't care if nobody from Bartlesville comes. I don't care if it's 10 people in a courthouse. I'm done waiting for them to choose me. I choose us." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he put his arm around me and we stood there, looking at the city that held me when my family wouldn't. And for the first time in weeks, I was standing on something that didn't shake. Monday morning, Nina walked into my office with 2 coffees and a piece of paper. 3 therapists, all women. One specializes in family estrangement. She set the list on my desk next to my keyboard. "First appointment is on you, but I'm driving you there if you don't call by Wednesday." I called on Tuesday. The wedding was back on. And for the first time, I wasn't planning it for my mother to see. I was planning it for me. There is a difference between planning a wedding and building one. Planning is what I did the first time: spreadsheets, timelines, vendor comparisons, cost per head calculations. Building is what I did the second time. Building starts with, what do I actually want this to feel like? I wanted wildflowers, not imported peonies or designer arrangements, Oklahoma wildflowers. Indian blanket, black-eyed Susan, coneflower. The flowers I used to pick on the side of the county road when I was 8 walking home from the bus stop because nobody was coming to get me. I wanted them because they were mine, not because they were Lorraine's or Shelby's or Bartlesville's. Mine. The girl on the county road kept one thing from that place, and it was the wildflowers. I wanted the food to taste like both halves of who I was becoming. James and I sat in his mother's kitchen on a Tuesday night and mapped out a menu. Galbi sliders, kimchi mac and cheese, cornbread with gochujang honey butter. Mrs. Park tasted the honey butter and closed her eyes and said nothing for 3 full seconds, which from her is the highest possible review. James's brother David, the quiet one, the one who became an accountant and communicates primarily through spreadsheets. David sent us a budget template the next day with a color-coded tab for every vendor. I printed it out and stuck it on the fridge. Our fridge now had a wedding budget in David's handwriting and a takeout menu from the Fio place where James and I had our first date. It looked like a life, a real one. The venue happened because of a parking garage. I need to explain. Warren Aldridge is 68 years old, retired, made his money in semiconductor manufacturing, and owns a property on a cliff in Malibu that is worth conservatively $40 million. I know this because Mercer and Associates did the seismic retrofit on that property in 2021, and I was the lead engineer. The house sits on a bluff above the Pacific, cantilevered over the edge in a way that looks reckless but is, if you check the math, exactly right. I checked the math. I spent 4 months checking the math. Warren used to come by the site and watch me work and ask questions the way James does, not to challenge, but to understand. We'd stayed in touch. Annual emails, a Christmas card, once a coffee in Santa Monica when he was in town for a board meeting. When I'd mentioned the engagement in January, he'd said, "Where's the wedding?" And I'd said, "Still figuring that out. Budget's tight." He'd nodded and moved on to asking about a hairline crack in his south-facing retaining wall. Then I got the call, 3 weeks after the balcony. Warren's voice, the same unhurried baritone he uses for everything, whether he's discussing foundation settlement or the weather. "Harper, use the estate. Warren, I can't accept you reinforce the foundation of my house. Literally. You're the reason that building is still standing on that cliff. The least I can do is let you stand on it for 1 day." A pause. Stop calculating and say yes. I said yes. Not because it was a $40 million property. Not because it would look stunning. Because a man I'd built something for offered me the thing I'd built, and that felt, structurally speaking, like the right kind of foundation for a marriage. The dress fitting was on a Saturday in March. A bridal shop in Beverly Hills that I would never have walked into on my own. But Nina had found a sample sale and informed me in the tone she uses for non-negotiable items that we were going. Mrs. Park drove up from Torrance. The 3 of us sat in a room with too many mirrors and a saleswoman named Deb, who kept asking about the bride's mother. "She's not available," I said. Neutral. Professional. The voice I use for project updates when something has gone wrong, but the client doesn't need the details. Nina looked at Mrs. Park. Mrs. Park looked at Nina. Something passed between them, an agreement. A small alliance formed without words, and Mrs. Park said, "We are here. That is enough." Deb adjusted and did not ask again. I tried on 4 dresses. The first was too heavy. The second was too ornate, too many things trying to be beautiful at once, which is a structural problem I recognize from buildings that compensate for a weak design with excessive decoration. The third was close. The fourth was right. It was simple. Silk crepe, no beading, no lace, no embellishments that needed explanation. It fell straight from the shoulders and moved when I moved, and was quiet the way I am quiet, not because it had nothing to say, but because it didn't need to say it loudly. I walked out of the fitting room. Nina said, "Oh my God." She covered her mouth with both hands, which is the most emotion I have ever seen from a woman who once described a magnitude 6.7 earthquake simulation as interesting. Mrs. Park didn't speak. She reached into her purse, pulled out a handkerchief, actual cloth, pressed and folded, because she is Eunice Park, and she does not carry tissues, and pressed it to her eyes. Then she straightened her spine, put the handkerchief away, and said, "You look like a bride who knows exactly who she is." I looked in the mirror, and for one clean, uncomplicated moment, I did not see the wrong daughter, or the girl on the porch, or the woman on the kitchen floor. I saw Harper, in a wedding dress, standing up straight. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote my vows. They came faster than I expected. The language was back, the structural metaphors, the precision. I wrote and rewrote and crossed out and started over and finally had something that felt true. Not perfect, true. In engineering, those are different standards. Perfect means no flaws. True means the thing does what it was designed to do. When I finished, I picked up my phone. My thumb went to contacts, and by reflex, by the muscle memory of 28 years, it scrolled to L. Lorraine Langston, the number I've called on every holiday, every birthday, every milestone that mattered, and several that didn't. The number that rings 4 times and sometimes answers and sometimes doesn't, and has never once called me first. My thumb hovered. 3 seconds. Then I scrolled up. Past L. To E. Eunice Park. She answered on the second ring. I wrote my vows. Can I read them to you? A pause. A small breath. Then, read it. Slower than you think you should. I read. She listened. When I finished, she said, "Perfect." And then, softer. "Your mother should hear this." "She won't." "I know. That is her loss." "Read it again." I read it again. Slower. And the woman on the other end of the phone, the woman who came to America with $300 in a suitcase and built a life anyway, listened to every word, like it was the most important thing she'd hear all day. April came faster than I was ready for. But then again, I'd spent 28 years getting ready. I just didn't know it. I woke up to the sound of the Pacific Ocean and the absence of the man I was about to marry. James had left the guest suite before dawn tradition, he'd said. Even though neither of us is particularly traditional, the bed was empty on his side. But on the nightstand, where my phone usually sat, there were 2 things. My T-square, 6 inches of steel, slightly bent at one corner from the night it hit the drywall. James had pulled it out of the wall the morning after, spackled the hole without comment, and kept it in his camera bag for weeks. And a note, in his loose, crooked handwriting. Something borrowed. Something steel. I picked it up. Ran my thumb along the edge the way I've done 1,000 times in parking lots, in conference rooms, on kitchen floors. The steel was cool, the angle was exact. 90 degrees. Always 90 degrees. I held it against my chest, then set it on the dresser next to my vows and went to get married. Mrs. Park arrived at 8 sharp. Nina arrived with a curling iron and a YouTube tutorial she'd watched 3 times. The first attempt at my hair was structurally unsound, lopsided in a way that defied her master's degree in engineering. Mrs. Park observed from the steamer without mercy, "The hair does not agree with your degree." I laughed real, from the belly, the kind that makes your eyes water. Nina recurled the left side. It was still slightly uneven. I didn't care. Real things are never symmetrical. When the dress was on, Mrs. Park reached into her purse and pulled out a silk pouch. Inside, a silver hairpin shaped like a crane with wings extended. "My mother gave this to me at Incheon Airport the day I left Korea," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She said I was dead to her. But she pressed this into my hand at the last moment and said, "Come back." She looked at me. "I want you to wear it today." I bent my head. She slid the pin into my hair, above my left ear, her fingers lingering adjusting, making sure it was secure, the way a mother checks that everything is in place before she lets go. There. Then, in a voice that almost cracked but did not, because she is Eunice Park. "Not yet. Mascara." At 10:30, I stood at the far end of a stone path along the cliff's edge. A wooden arch wrapped in Oklahoma wildflower's Indian blanket. Black-eyed Susan, coneflower. 85 people in white folding chairs. James at the end in a dark suit, no tie, his eyes already wet. There was no one beside me. No father, no mother. I walked alone. And I need you to understand the difference between walking alone because no one showed up and walking alone because you decided that the person who delivers you to the altar should be the same person who got you this far. That person was me. 85 people stood. I don't know when, I only noticed when the sound changed. A rustling, a shifting, the collective exhale of people who had decided to rise. Not because tradition told them to, because something in the sight of a woman walking alone toward the person who stayed made them want to be on their feet. James spoke his vows first. Warm, funny, specific. He talked about the day we met. You were arguing with a piece of rebar about spacing. You were losing, and I thought, I want to know this woman. The guests laughed. Mrs. Park shook her head. Then it was my turn. I looked at James. The ocean moved behind him. The wildflowers trembled. 85 people were quiet. I opened my mouth. And for one terrible, beautiful moment, nothing. The words backed up behind my chest like everything I'd ever wanted to say to anyone. Then I found it. My phrase, the one I'd lost in a dark apartment and found again on a balcony. Structurally speaking, James, my voice cracked. I stopped, breathed. The ocean filled the silence. Structurally speaking, you are the only foundation I've ever stood on that didn't shift. The sound that moved through the crowd was not a gasp. It was softer an inhale that traveled from the front row backward, like a wave pulling away from shore. Mrs. Park pressed her handkerchief to her mouth. James's chin dropped, and a tear fell straight down onto our joined fingers. I didn't cry. I smiled, wide and real, because for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't asking anyone to confirm that I was enough. I knew. James's colleague Marcus had filmed the ceremony from 3 angles. Warren watched from the upper patio of the house. I'd reinforced, and said to someone beside him, I learned this later. That is the most beautiful thing that's ever happened on this property. I didn't know the cameras would change everything. I didn't know that by Monday morning, $40 million worth of Malibu coastline would be on television screens across the country. And I didn't know that in a living room in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, a woman folding laundry would look up at the screen and see her daughter walking alone down an aisle lined with wildflowers, and realize she had missed the only moment that mattered. Marcus edited the footage into a 3-minute reel for his portfolio. He posted it on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, a producer at a network morning show had called it the most beautiful wedding video I've seen in 10 years, and asked permission to run it as a feel-good segment. By Thursday morning, $40 million worth of Malibu coastline was on national television, and a woman in a simple dress was walking alone down an aisle of wildflowers in front of 6 million viewers. I didn't know until Nina texted, "Turn on Channel 7. Right now." I watched myself on the screen. The cliff, the arch, the wildflowers. The moment I stopped mid-vow, and the ocean filled the silence. It was surreal, like watching a structural model of a building I'd designed, and realizing for the first time that it was beautiful, not just sound. My phone rang 11 minutes later. Lorraine. I didn't answer. She called again. And again. 14 times before 7 a.m. the next morning. Shelby texted 6 times. Earl called once, left no voicemail. One call from a man who has never once in my life chosen to pick up the phone and dial my number, and even now, he couldn't bring himself to leave a message. I let the calls pile up, like load on a beam I was no longer responsible for. On Saturday, I listened to one voicemail. Just one. Lorraine's voice cracked open in a way I'd never heard. Performance and genuine grief braided so tightly together I couldn't separate them. And I don't think she could either. Harper, honey, I saw the wedding. It was beautiful. I don't understand why you didn't tell us it was going to be like that. If we'd known, I stopped the voicemail. If they'd known the venue was worth $40 million, they'd have come. If they'd known it would be on television, they'd have come. If they'd known the dress was beautiful and the cliff was stunning and the wildflowers looked like something from a magazine, they'd have come. They would have booked a flight and ironed their Sunday clothes and told the church ladies they were going to their daughter's wedding in Malibu and smiled for every camera Marcus pointed at them. But they wouldn't come for me. Just me. Just Harper. In a courthouse, in a backyard, in a parking lot. Just their daughter. Asking them to be present for the most important day of her life. That wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. I was never going to be enough, not because of anything I lacked, but because they had decided I wasn't a long time ago, on a night when there were only 4 tickets to Disney World. I typed 2 words. Sent the same message to Lorraine, Earl, and Shelby. Same text, same timestamp. Too late. Then I turned off my phone. Not in anger. Not in revenge. In the same quiet way you close a permit on a completed project. The work is done. The structure holds. There is nothing left to inspect. 2 weeks later, a package arrived from Bartlesville. No return name, but I recognized Shelby's handwriting on the label, rounder than our mother's, less precise. Inside was a small Ziploc bag. Gold confetti. The shredded remains of my wedding invitation. The cream cardstock and calligraphy I'd chosen so carefully, now in pieces. Lorraine had kept them. Not all of them, just a handful, tucked into a box on the kitchen counter, saved the way you save something you're not ready to throw away but can't bring yourself to reassemble. Shelby's note said only, "Mom wanted you to have these. I don't know why." I held the fragments. Gold on cream. I could see part of a letter, the curve of a P from park, maybe, or the tail of a Y from ceremony. I could have tried to piece them back together. I could have called. I could have opened the door I'd closed. I put the confetti in a small wooden box on my desk, next to the T-square, next to Mrs. Park's crane hairpin, which I'd worn once and would keep forever. I opened a new photo album, the one James had bought the week after the wedding. Burgundy cover, thick pages, and placed our wedding photo on the first page. Harper and James Park. April 2026, Malibu, California. The second page was empty. The whole book was empty. But that was the point. We'd build it as we went. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started my workday. Outside the window, Los Angeles moved in its 10 million directions. The T-square caught the morning light. The album sat open, and somewhere in Bartlesville, a woman with 14 unanswered calls and a handful of missing confetti was learning what I'd learned a long time ago on a porch in a Sonic t-shirt. Some people leave, and the ones who stay, they're the ones who matter. What does too late really mean? Is it punishment? Or is it just the truth that some doors close not because someone slams them,